All right, let me jump ahead to where we started, I guess, with Plame. There's so much detail in the book and your role in it and kind of the make or break moment that it represented for you. If, as you point that day that the president confirmed that he was involved in declassifying parts of the NIE, in declassifying parts of the National Intelligence Estimate about Iraq and to use against Joe Wilson, is he, do you think, did he in essence, or perhaps even legally, okay the leaking of Valerie Plame's CIA identity?
Well, that's a question that I raise in the book. I don't know the truth behind it, but did this set in motion the chain of events that led to the leaking of Valerie Plame's identity? I do not believe that the president was in any way directly involved in the leaking of her identity. But that was a very disillusioning moment for me when I found out when the initially hit the press, and we were in, I believe it was in North Carolina, if I remember correctly, and a reporter shouted out to the president, "Is it true that you authorized the secret leaking of this previously, it was classified information, but the president does have the legal authority, walk on to Air Force One?" And the president asked, "What was the reporter asking?" And I said, he asserted that you were the one who authorized Scooter Libby leaking this information. And he said, "Yeah, I did." And it really took me back. I could tell he didn't want to sit there and talk about it. And I walked back to the senior staff area on Air Force One, where I usually sit. And it took a while for that to sink in. But that was just before I left. And at that point, I'd made a decision that I could no longer continue in this administration. Now, there are changes coming in, too, and I talk about this. And Josh Bolten was looking to make some changes, too. So my time frame was moved up a little bit from what I preferred. But that was the second defining moment that really caused me a lot of dismay and disillusionment.
Did you go into this kind of detail and the kind of detail that was in the book about the outing of Plame and what you knew or what you suspected with the special prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald?
This is all consistent with what I told the FBI investigators, the prosecutors. I don't believe Patrick Fitzgerald was at my grand jury testimony. I testified, I think it was early February of, would have been 2004, in that, and what I knew. And all this information is very consistent with what I told them. But I did tell White House reporters when the revelations came out that Rove and Libby were both involved, when they'd said they weren't, that my hands were tied by the White House counsel's office. They said, "We can't comment on this." So it put me in a very tough situation. I'd been undermined by these two fellow colleagues and senior staffers. And I told the White House reporters at the time that someday I look forward to talking about this when this is behind us. And I think they really knew that I was expressing my sincere desire to do so. And in this book, I go into great detail, every detail about what I know.
Was that a sort of warning that this book was coming? Did you know even that that was what you meant by that? When you were going to, you look forward someday to talking about it? Did you mean the book?
The book? No, I wasn't thinking about it at that point. I mean, I was still at the White House. But as I left the White House, I think you need some time to kind of step back from being in that bubble to really be able to reflect on events and try to understand and make sense of them. Because when I went to work for the president, I had all this great hope, like a lot of people, that he was going to come to Washington and change Washington, as he had governed in Texas as a bipartisan governor who had 70% approval. It didn't happen, and I wanted to go back and look. Why didn't that happen? Why did things go so terribly off course from what he promised? He assured people he was going to be a bipartisan leader, a person of honor and integrity, restore honor and integrity to the White House. And where did things go wrong? And that's really the overall narrative in the book, but certainly the Plame episode was a defining moment for me that is a central part of the book.
That is what I found so useful at the beginning of the book, was this context of why it was, not that just you all believed in this man, but why you believed in him, what it was, and you just explained it, that background from seeing him in that sort of idealized bipartisan role in Texas, which he had not recreated, or certainly. Well, there's a little time left in the administration, but I'm not expecting some sort of great conversion where he's going to be a bipartisan president in the last few months. But did you hold on to that belief to the very end in that famous goodbye scene? Were you still thinking maybe he's suddenly going to turn into what he was in Texas, maybe my faith in him will be restored. Was that the kind of rationalization that was at work?
Well, I don't think I held on to it till the end. When we came in, we got some bipartisan achievements accomplished on tax cuts and on education reform, education reforms that I really believed in as part of his agenda. But by the time that the Iraq War started to, I think it's critical that in a time of war that you not only build bipartisan support when you're going into it, but that you also maintain that support. And to do that, you really have to embrace a high level of openness and forthrightness from the beginning. Because when expectations turned out to be unmet or improperly set, it came back to haunt us. And the president is not someone to willingly go and change course in terms of his thinking when it comes to, we made a mistake on this front. And so I think that at the time I was there, I started realizing that, or started thinking that, maybe Washington can't be changed. Maybe this is just the way it is, and both parties share all the responsibility. But no one shares more responsibility than the President of the United States to set the right tone and to change things. And no one has more of a bully pulpit to be able to do that. But it requires embracing candor and honesty to a high degree, particularly in this transparent society that we live in. And this White House was too secretive, or has been too secretive, too compartmentalized, and too willing to embrace the unsavory political tactics that are at the heart of the excesses of the permanent campaign.
We'll continue with Scott McClellan on that issue, in part the great disillusionment and the great question, why wasn't what was in this book written or spoken or shouted from the rooftops in, say, 2004?